The return of the big man. There was a time when the big man dominated the court, as dinosaurs once did to our planet. In the 1960s and 1970s, it was almost impossible to win an MVP unless you were a dominant center like Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. When these guys battled, it was like Godzilla versus Mothra. These monsters were there to dunk, block, and seemingly take every rebound. They were unquestionably the most essential players on the court. And like the dinosaurs, the classic center seemed to be dying out, as the prevalence of the three ball altered the game in the 2010s. But unlike their massive paleontological forefathers, centers adapted to modern basketball. As a result, they have come back quicker and more fully integrated into the team. Indeed, the last three NBA MVPs were centers, namely the outstanding Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid. But how did the centers get their mojo back? And how would today's big men measure up to their bruising forefathers? Let's take a deep dive. Why did the big men disappear? Shaquille O'Neal and Yao Ming were classic-style big men. But when they both retired in 2011, a new, equally dominant generation failed to emerge. The two remaining impact centers, Dwight Howard and Andrew Bynum, were increasingly seen as outdated liabilities. What had happened? A lot of think pieces were written at the time with various answers. Some talked about how players now jump from high school to the pros and didn't learn the fundamentals required to defend and take rebounds properly. Others said that Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson had made kids aspire to play guard instead of center. Adding the three-point line forced players to focus further from the paint. And there is something to those. But the most critical change to the game was speed. Conditioning has improved in all major sports, and players are just quicker today than they used to be. As a result, a lumbering hulk like Patrick Ewing is less of an asset when the play is over before they can return to defend. Whatever the explanation, in 2011, as Ming and Shaq retired, Dirk Nowitzki gave the league a glimpse of the future. The 7-foot players could take rebounds and fight in the paint while shooting better than just about any guard. LeBron James was another big player who could perform some of the functions of a center while providing incredible value throughout the court. That kind of versatility added a slew of weapons to the arsenal. Meanwhile, Chris Bosh complemented as a center who shot threes as often as he drove to the rim. Therefore, instead of the classic lumbering center, big men who could offer flexibility were now preferred by NBA coaches who sometimes went to oversized forwards to cover the paint to maintain a fast break advantage. The Warriors, in particular, paved the way for a centerless type of basketball. While Steph Curry and Klay Thompson pummeled their rivals with outside shooting, they used non-dominant centers like Andrew Bogut to control the rim. But at some point, the game went too far in the small direction. Although the game had changed, there was still a place for a true center. It was just that the role had to adapt, like everything else in basketball. Changes in the game made the classic big man basically obsolete. But they also created opportunities for centers. Sure, the rising importance of the three ball meant that guards were taking more shots than ever before. But it also cleared up space in the paint and freed up lanes for centers if they were athletic enough to take advantage. Two players have led the way in this resurgence. MVPs Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid are already massive superstars. They have shown that the modern center can be as dominant as their old-timey equivalents, with some speed and intelligence. One thing that sets Jokic apart from any center in his history is his first-rate passing ability. In 2022-23, the Joker passed for almost 10 rebounds per game, and had his second highest total of assists behind Trae Young. How revolutionary is this? Before Jokic, the highest average ever achieved by a center was the year Wilt averaged 4.4. That means that in one very important way, Jokic is more dominant than any of the classic centers ever were. The new centers are incredibly efficient shooters. Jokic led the league in field goals, with 63% in 2022-23, while Embiid was second with 54%. It's tough to compare players from different eras. As we have already discussed, the game has changed dramatically over the years. The introduction of the 3-second rule in 1990, and of course, the addition of a 3-point line in 1979, had massive repercussions for the game and the role of centers. And until 1976, talent was split between the ABA and the NBA, watering down the pool. So, comparing current-day centers to Shaq is much easier than Wilt or Bill Russell. But even in that more recent comparison, we see massive differences in what centers do. Regarding scoring, the numbers for Jokic and Embiid are similar to the most illustrious centers of the past. Shaq focused a lot more on taking offensive rebounds than his contemporary peers. In his best years, O'Neal took down around 4 offensive rebounds per game. Meanwhile, Embiid has never taken more than 2.8, and Jokic peaked at 2.9. Meanwhile, we don't have a separation of offensive versus defensive rebounds for Wilt. But considering that he took about double the amount of rebounds the Joker and Embiid took down, it was probably 6 or more. However, the modern centers, especially Jokic, are far more integrated into the offense than their predecessors. As a result, when we look at stats like box creation, an estimate of open shots carved out for teammates, current players are leaps and bounds ahead. So we already know that they pass for more assists, but they also work tirelessly to make their teammates get better looks. In other words, Embiid and Jokic are better teammates. So, on offense, it's kind of a wash. The older centers do better at rebounding, with modern ones better at passing and keeping the rest of the offense going. What about defense? We know this style is very different. Old school centers spent a lot more time in the paint. Using stats to measure defense performance reliably is complex, but we have some excellent advanced statistical metrics to consult. Beneficial, though still flawed, is the defensive plus-minus metric. That looks at the points allowed on defense in 100 plays with the player on versus of the court. By any measure, the greatest defensive center of the modern era is Hakeem Olajuwon. He stands head and shoulders above the rivals. It's no coincidence the Defensive Player of the Year award is named after him. When you take that outlier out of the picture, all the great centers have similarly dominant numbers. Shaq, David Robinson, and Ewing put up similar numbers at their peaks. Both Jokic and Embiid are defensive powerhouses and fit right in with that company. Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid are a new spin on the dominant center. They rebound less and pass more, but they have more in common with the great big men of yore than we think. They are equally dominant scorers and defenders. It looks like they fit comfortably among the absolute elite in their positions. And Shaq or Ewing would find equals if they took the court against the last 2 MVPs. So, neither the old school centers nor Jokic and Embiid would have a significant advantage in a one-on-one situation. But we will say this in favor of the new guys. Since they are better teammates and creators, they are also more complete basketball players.